So just echo me with a clap for a moment so that we can get on the same page. Oh, let's do that again. Very good, thank you. Why? Because we're at a conference talking about the power of oneness, and I want to invite and invoke a collective, united field, the unified field for us to hear this story in. I'm all about the last 20 minutes of the day. And once upon a time, there was a boy who went searching for silence. He had heard that silence is golden, silence is peaceful, silence is blissful. Most of all, he had heard that in silence, he could be himself, and he wanted nothing more. This boy struggled with the noise of everyday life. There were cars and buses, advertisements and programs, instructions and advice. Everywhere he went, noise entered in. He found this very difficult. So he went on a search for golden, peaceful, blissful silence. Anybody recognize this boy? You know, maybe he's in your family, maybe he's in your school, maybe he's inside you at times. I think that I'm really lucky that I've got perhaps the best job in the world. I get to create worlds where heroic characters have heartfelt victories that I can share through books and with readers so that readers can learn from it. And I also have this amazing opportunity to work with helping grown-ups to return to center, time and time again when the challenges of their life have pulled them left or right. I see in my coaching practice dads who are extraordinary businessmen, but they can't translate the language of business into the language of empathy and compassion when they transition from work to home. I see extraordinary women as businesswomen, who also have this dual role of being mothers. And I work to support them when very often there's a loss of identity in who am I? Because the person I was before I became a mother is no longer the person who I am. And now I'm going back into work, and we have these stages of life where identity becomes important. And then there's the kids at school who, as we've heard today, as young as, grade 5, they're worried about what they're going to become in the world, what they're going to grow up to do. And I get to work with all of these different contact points. Now, these pain points that I've mentioned here are the reason that I have a job. It's a little unfortunate, but true. And Brené Brown, she speaks about perhaps the greatest pain. She says, in the context of global suffering, human rights abuse, violence, poverty, that not belonging in your family is perhaps one of the greatest, most dangerous hurts. That's because it has the power to break your heart, your spirit, and your sense of self-worth. That was her experience. That was my experience. And I wonder if it's an experience that you know. When I was born into a fourth-generation family jewelry business. I was the fourth generation. And so I grew up knowing what I was going to do in the world. I was going to be a jeweler. But 4 years into being a jeweler, things weren't working out so great for me. And I turned my back on that business quite literally the morning after spinal surgery. And I said, I'm not coming back. And it threw me into the biggest questions of my life. That big question, what am I going to do? I mean, that was totally overwhelming at the time. But there was a question that was far more important to me. How was I going to be? Because some of how people had been towards me didn't really fit with my nature. the teasing at school, the bullying that I had experienced, the lack of empathy from very, very loving and caring parents who were just unskilled in emotional language. I wanted to work out how I was going to be in the world. And so I started my personal quest, searching for this place of contentment inside. I was very lucky that my journey led me into the world of healing. I discovered that these hands, placed with kindness and care and intention on this body, could bring a great deal of calmness and settledness in my internal environment. And as I trained as a healer, I learned that I could bring that to other people as well. It wasn't enough for me to be on the weekend workshop circuit. I dove deep into the world of psychology, developmental psychology, the world of what happens to us when we're kids, how does trauma show up, what does stress look like. And along the way, I started to explore some things I'd like to share with you. So what happens to our painful experiences? That moment, so I go, let's make it like a first painful experience. I show up at school and I've never been teased or bullied before, and so I'm just kind of my big radiant self. And then there's this moment where somebody says something nasty or a teacher gets over-controlling. This was apartheid South Africa, after all. And the first thing that happens to me is there's pain. And from that, I make a move away from myself to going, hold on, I'm not safe here. I'm not loved here. I'm not sure if I belong here. And then there's this backward step where the defensive structures come up, and I build up my walls so that I can be safe and I can survive that painful experience that's happening there. And I learned a lot about how to help adults return from behind these defensive walls, to come back and explore the negative beliefs that they've created for themselves, to get back to this true essence that they are or that they were before all of that happened. In part, this is why I work with kids. Because every adult who came through my therapy practice was dealing with an issue that started before they were 6 years old. And I thought to myself, but how do we interrupt this process? Let's go back to it a moment. There's another thought that occurred to me. When does pain happen? And I want to tell you something that's perhaps the most obvious thing that it's so obvious nobody's ever said it to you. Trauma happens when you're awake. Pain happens when you're awake. Adaptive behavior happens when you're awake in response to someone. But that little bit in the middle, the negative belief systems, that happens 24/7. Think about it. Have you ever been to sleep on an argument, hoping it'll be gone by the morning? We know that one? And, well, was it? Or was it still there? Finish the sentence for me. When I go to sleep feeling anxious, I wake up feeling anxious. So when I go to sleep feeling safe, loved, and belonging, I have the opportunity to wake up feeling safe, loved, and belonging. And this is an opportunity for all of us grown-ups, but particularly for our kids as they're developing. Now, I got fascinated by the neuroscience of sleep. I dove deep into this, but I got to tell you, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm a storyteller. So let me tell it to you the way that I see it. Did you know that we've got these little brain people inside our head? It's true, right? And they like to hang out at the front of our brain just on a normal day because everything's going well, right? It's cozy. And then that moment, that painful first bullying, first teasing experience happens, and they jump into action and dig a tunnel from the front of the brain over to the back of the brain, just to give the little brain people at the back one core message. Ah! Okay, it's going to be terrible. And all of this happens whilst I'm awake. Then I go to sleep. Now, one of the key functions of sleep is to stabilize and enhance memory. So the night shift come in, and they stabilize and enhance the memories, the negative beliefs of the day. You're not safe, you're not loved, and you don't belong. So by the time I wake up in the morning, it's madness, right? I want to do it like Neo. There's this whole backwards, forwards pandemonium that's happening inside the neural pathways in the brain, anticipating something that's going to happen because something happened yesterday. And this little brain person, 20, 30 years later, wasn't even alive when that painful experience happened. Well, just wandering around a part of the brain he's never been to before, comes over to this tunnel and steps in, and is predisposed to have exactly the same experience triggered as what happened 30 years before. What we need here is a new plan. What if in the last 20 minutes of the day, after the painful experience happens, but before the adaptive behavior kicks in, there's a new message that says to you, to your brain, to your children, you are safe. You are loved. You belong. And then you get to go to sleep with this Zen moment, reminding your neural pathways and your body about your safety, lovedness, and belonging. In a minute, I'm going to share with you a story, because stories are a fantastic bridge in the last 20 minutes of the day. For many of us, we grew up on story, but there's so much more happening at that time of day than just story. What is needed to deliver that message of safety, loving, and belonging is your love and connection. And you might say to me, Andrew, is love and connection really enough? Do I need to do more? And my answer is yes, love and connection is really enough. And here's why. Love and connection is the antidote to painful moments that are invariably created by an act of separation and a lack of love. That it is the exact corollary, the opposite. It's what's needed. So there's so many ways that you can show up and offer love and connection to your little ones, to yourself. And story is great because you get to come side by side and enter into a world together that takes you both from your normal roles of parent or grandparent and child into a partnership together as you enter a journey. And I want to share to you today about silence, because silence is also a wonderful ally in creating a sense of inner connection, something that you may create for yourselves. Now, I spent last week in a kids' school in Boulder, Colorado, and I got to work with the story and silence. And I got to ask every child from kindergarten through grade 5, what do you know about silence? That's where we started. And I heard words like calmness, quietness, no noise, but some noise. Nature was referenced. Lots of sounds of birds and the rivers and being out in the trees. And I share that because it's deeply my experience that kids love silence. And I know that might not be every parent's experience, because they also love a great deal of noise and high energy and running around. But you have an opportunity to model silence to the young ones in your life just by centering within yourselves and enjoying silence. And again, it feels to me such a privilege to be able to create worlds where heroic characters have heartfelt victories and to be able to share it with you. Are you ready for a story? Yeah? Where did I put it? Right here. So every story starts the same way in my world, and that's with the 4 simple breaths of what I call snuggle breathing. So I invite you to follow along and breathe with me. First breath out. Breathing in, I breathe for me. I breathe for you. I breathe for us. And I breathe for all that surrounds us. Thank you. Once upon a time, there was a boy who went searching for silence. He had heard that silence is golden, silence is peaceful, silence is blissful. Most of all, he had heard that in silence, he could be himself. He wanted nothing more. This boy struggled with the noise of everyday life. There were cars and buses, advertisements and programs, instructions and advice. Everywhere he went, noise entered in. He found this very difficult. So he went on a search for golden, peaceful, blissful silence. He walked to the bottom of the garden searching for silence, but the neighbor's dog was barking. He walked to the park searching for silence, but the frisbee players were laughing. He walked into the forest searching for silence, but the dog walkers were talking. So he walked right up to the top of a hill. There he sighed. I've done it, he thought as he listened carefully. I found silence. But just as he had the thought, a noisy airplane flew over. Oh no, he exclaimed. There is no silence out there in the world. This was a false quest, he thought. They lied to me, he blamed. There's no such thing as golden, peaceful, blissful silence. He raged with anger, stomping and shouting and throwing rocks down the hill. With time, his anger softened. I will have to struggle with the difficult noises all my life. What am I to do? He cried out loud. He sat down. Utterly helpless, he closed his eyes and wept. At first he wept short, breathless sobs, gasping for each new breath. Over time, his breathing softened and deepened, becoming deeper and deeper, in and out. The boy felt like he was falling inwards. He was too tired to be scared, so he fell. He was too helpless to think better, so he fell. He was enjoying the familiar feeling, so he fell. He fell right into Silence. Silence was like a dream to him. A whole world opened up. It was spacious, comforting, and oh so peaceful. A big smile spread across his face as he rested in silence, feeling deeply nourished inside. Aha, he thought, silence is not a thing to find, it's a place inside of me. I can go there and visit whenever and wherever I want. From inside silence, he could hear another airplane fly overhead. He simply smiled. From inside silence, he could hear the dog walker talking. He simply smiled. From inside silence, he could hear the frisbee players laughing, and the boy simply smiled. When he walked down the hill, silence came with him. When he walked through the forest, silence came with him. When he crossed the park, silence came with him. Silence was his friend. That day, he fell head over heels in love with silence. He loved silence so deeply, and silence loved him back. And each day after, he made sure to take 20 special minutes to fall inwards into silence. All the things he had heard turned out to be true. He discovered that silence is golden, silence is peaceful, and silence is very deliciously blissful. Most of all, he discovered that in silence he could be himself. And this made him very, very happy. The end.